It has been a strange 12 months, all sorts of challenges for all of us, especially those who have become parents in lockdown.
More than 600,000 babies have been born in the UK in the last year, and the impact of the pandemic on new mums and dads is only now being felt.
For sure. So, Dr Larisa, hello, Doctor.
Hi.
Hello,
Is here to help us with those that might be struggling. We've got a few questions from our viewers, but first of all, let's just get a kind of a take on the last year. So, what's been the main problem for new mums and dads in lockdown?
Gosh, this has been huge. I mean, you know, you've mentioned the numbers born, but out of all of those numbers born, we know that mental health is always an issue when women feel a lot more vulnerable at the time when they're pregnant and afterwards. And the case is also true for dads as well, new dads. It's something we don't really talk a lot about. We did do an item last summer about this, actually, and how prevalent paternal mental health issues are. But just to give you a sort of estimate of how big the problem is, normally we expect about 15 to 20% of mums to suffer some sort of perinatal mental health issues. The figure rose to between 60 and 70% in the pandemic. So that's what's being reported through the Maternal Mental Health Alliance that's been formed, an organisation of various different charities and volunteers who've launched various different questionnaires to look retrospectively at what's been going on.
Is that because the support network, the usual support networks, just aren't around them because they don't have the day-to-day getting out there, seeing other new mums? They can't see their families, right?
Yeah, it's been a combination of all of these factors, really. So, yes, the fact that we don't necessarily have the infrastructure readily available. This was a problem even before the pandemic, but what the pandemic has done is essentially shown us how big this problem is and where the gaps are and where the inequalities are. So it has affected people disproportionately. And, yes, a lot of it is to do with the fact the support hasn't necessarily been there. Women haven't been able to get and access face-to-face appointments. A lot of it has been done virtually. And as we all know, it's very difficult to gauge how well someone's doing when you're only talking to them on the phone.
Of course.
Or looking at them on screen. You can't gauge the fine a nuances, and people are much more tempted to say they're fine, whereas actually they're struggling to cope.
Yeah.
So there's been all of that. Also, women and men not being able to come into hospital. So you may have heard from the first shutdown that we had that partners weren't allowed on labour ward. Now, that did change in the second lockdown, and the situation is far, far better where partners are now allowed to be in labour ward, but many are still not allowed on the postnatal ward. Many are still not allowed to be there for scans. In fact, there's been an estimate that about 77% of women received bad news on their scans alone in December. Without anyone by their side. So
that's a trauma, isn't it? It is literally trauma.
It is. It's exactly that. It's deeply traumatic, and it's given rise to incredible rates of depression, anxieties, post-traumatic stress syndrome, which has affected dads as well. Because, can you imagine if your partner's being told... You're completely helpless. Your partner's being told that, she's miscarried or that there's no longer a heartbeat, and you can't be there. Horrible. Or you're listening, on the other end of the line in the car park.
Yeah.
It's been really, really hard. But having said all of that, look, I have been at the coalface of all of this in the hospitals. Hospitals have really struggled. They've done their best, given the current climate and the circumstances, because they have a duty of care towards all of their patients to protect all of them from COVID-19. But I think we're in a situation now where we have to be able to look at some of these figures, these statistics, recognise this is a really big problem. What are we going to do about it? How are we still going to keep people safe, but also allow partners and support to be there?
We've got 5, I think, viewer questions here. I really want to get through them, so let's crack on. Vina says, my traumatic birth has left me extremely anxious. I had my first baby in 2020 in May. Very traumatic birth. I was lucky to have my partner with me. Eventually, my partner had to leave and I didn't see anyone else for 4 days. I'm now suffering flashbacks and extremely heightened anxiety. My family haven't met my baby. Gosh, I'm so anxious about them seeing them. I don't want to get ill and being able to look after my baby. I'm also returning to work soon, which is making me worried. What can she do to ease that anxiety?
I mean, you can hear the pain in the question. I'm so sorry for your experience, Vina. Having a traumatic birth experience is difficult enough, and then all of the other consequences that came from that. And I think the first thing to get to grips with is perhaps have a debrief with someone who was involved in your birth experience. So to talk to someone, to understand why it was traumatic, why the perception that you have has been, so deeply difficult and traumatic for you, and try and untangle and deal with some of those issues, because I fear that if you don't do that, when it comes to potentially being pregnant again or having another baby, some of this stuff may trigger you and it may impact on a much deeper level. So it's really important to get to grips with that. And please don't feel ashamed about contacting your hospital to offer that support to you. And then reaching out to your visitors, if you still have any coming, but also really importantly to your support groups now that they're beginning to open up. Plus, there's some really good virtual support groups out there like Mind. I've already mentioned the Maternal Mental Health Alliance as well, Pandas, who are great for both mums and dads, and trying to search for some of these support groups on Facebook as well and the various different social media outlets, I think will really help you just to bond with other mothers. I understand there's also a Letter of Light service which has started in the UK, which is where mums who've gone through a really traumatic experience of writing to one another.
Oh, that's a great idea.
And explaining what they've gone through.
What a great
and so
idea.
That's been really, really moving.
What's
and I
that
think
called?
Letters of Light support service. Yeah, so check that out. And there's also a hub for hope that's a data service available on the internet where you can type in your postcode and they can tell you what mental health support services are available there.
Lovely. Let's go to Victoria. My husband's really struggling. I'm 30 weeks pregnant and I've had a really difficult pregnancy because of restrictions. My husband has kind of felt like a third party during the whole pregnancy and this has greatly impacted on his mental health. Dr. Larisa.
Well, Victoria, thank you so much for writing in about your husband's anxiety because we don't hear enough from men at all. And you're absolutely right that, you know, men are quite often tend to be sidelined within this whole process of labour, the antenatal and postnatal experience. I think it's really important that you recognise that and he does reach out for help. Sadly, there isn't as much support out there for dads as there is for mums, but it is beginning to change. It is beginning to get better. So the Fatherhood Institute does a lot of work if you look at their virtual support services online as well. Pandas is another great one that we've already mentioned. And again, support groups that you can find online. But if it's getting really bad, you know, making sure he reaches out to his GP and a counsellor to get some help and support. Because again, if these issues aren't dealt with, they can trigger later down the line.
It's getting busy. That's the key. It's just he just needs to get busy.
Yeah.
So you literally,
Yeah.
But that, you know, when we had Casper, you hit the kitchen. I mean, I love cooking anyway, but you become the support network. That's what you do, you know, because you are genuinely not the most important. I mean, he wasn't the most important person in the room anyway, but you become, you know, you are the third most important person in that relationship. But that's if you embrace that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it'll really help him to see that you're doing well and that you're, you know, coping. Because I think when your partner can see that, they immediately feel a bit better about it. If they see you're suffering, then that can impact them too. So yeah, definitely getting...
Lauren has written in and said, I'm struggling to leave the house. I'm 22, I had my little girl in December. I have extreme anxiety and depression after giving birth and things have got much worse. I now hate leaving the house. I find any excuse not to do so. Recently, I was forced to go out with my daughter to post a parcel. Oh, poor thing, it was awful. I'm now worried that lockdown ending will make it even worse.
Lauren, I'm so sorry. This is, really sad. But I just want to say that, you know, for any new mum, leaving the house can be really difficult, actually. And it's not abnormal to feel like you just want to stay at home all the time, or you feel a bit down about the whole experience. Many women and men are feeling pretty robbed of, you know, a joyous, happy situation that they should have. So please, you know, I just want to validate your feelings because they are normal not to want to leave to a certain extent, but I think if it's beginning to impact you on that kind of detrimental level where you're not able to do anything, even things that used to bring you happiness, then I think it's really, really important you do reach out to your health visitor, you do reach out to your GP, and you do reach out to a counsellor to discuss some of those issues. But also, you know, going back to some points that you made, Dermot, doing some practical things, so trying to, you know, sort of sideline half an hour of your time every day just to do something you really love. Doing a bit of exercise as well, which, you know, has been proven to help serotonin levels, which is your feel-good hormone. That kind of thing can really help and bonding with your baby. So make sure you're doing all of that if you can. I know it's hard. And
we haven't got much time. Let's go to Emma. My baby was born in April 2020 and he and I have had no access to baby groups since. I can't even say that word. He's had no social interaction. Is this going to impact his development?
Yeah, so, I mean, the truth of the matter is we haven't had any studies yet to say that it will, and I can understand your concern, and it's a very valid concern to have, and now that the support bubbles are opening up and we are allowed to socialise and mix a bit more safely, then I think hopefully you will be able to introduce your baby, you know, to more children and more families. But, yeah, it's a valid point, but there's no reason to think that it will impact him in the long run, so please don't worry about that. And, again, really important that you come back to your own mental health and how you're coping and how you're dealing with things, because only then can you actually be, you know, a good mum, happy baby.
Yeah, they soak all of that up, don't they? They see
Yeah.
you happy and you're... You know.
Yeah.
That's why your baby's so chilled out.
He is
you are.
so chilled out. He's too chilled out.
He's too chilled out.
Start crawling.
Dr. Larisa, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you
Talk about that
so
all day.
much.